Let's paint the St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City. You know, it's really complicated right there on the top, and there's triangles everywhere. I was amazed by that after I took a picture of it. We were over there in New York City not too long ago in the holiday season, and I took a lot of pictures, and I was looking at it before painting this thing, and I'm going, my gosh, there's a lot of detail to this. There's no way I'm going to spend all that time drawing it. I might as well take a picture if I was going to do that, right? So what I'm doing is I'm going to paint it with just a wash, just to kind of give the impression of what I feel when I see that. Now, you're going to see a lot of steps here. You're going to see a lot of steps that I have. Step one is actually getting it all laid in composition, and number two, I'm laying it out with a Tombow pen. It's a water-based pen, and just to kind of get the overall effect. But when I actually do the wash, I'm not going to get too literal on really anything, and you'll see that for sure. I'm going to let the wash and the color of the wash just kind of drape on down and hopefully show some of the drama that I see when I see a monumental landmark building such as this. It's so vertical. I want to accentuate some of the vertical lines in that too with this wash. You'll see. What I have been using on this are just kind of a limited number of items. I started off with this Tombow, used the pointy edge, and that's what I'm doing in this stage right here. And I'm using kind of a light gray. So it's just to kind of give an actual kind of an idea of what it is. I'm trying to hold it fairly loose, so I'm not going to be too literal even with my pre-sketching. And then I went ahead and you'll see kind of the order, but the brushes that I used were only three, well, I used four. Okay, so four brushes. I used a round brush, and that brush is really good. It's a really versatile brush, as you may already know, because it's got this point here. And if you were to push down on it, you can actually make a broader line, but you can also get into tight spots by lightly using the point. And then if that's not tight enough, I have a rigger that's really, really tiny. And that I use later on in some kind of highlightings for the shades and shadows. I also use this flat brush. What I like about the flat brush is I can make broad strokes, but also can turn it and make just really narrow lines. And so when I'm adding color to a water washed image, and I don't want to go over some of the edges, I'll use this edge right here to kind of go to the boundaries and not go past that. You can also do that with any of these. You could do that with a round brush with a tip, and that's pretty successful too. In fact, here we go. And I'm using a round brush, and you can see I'm using the tip of that, and then I'm smearing it a little bit to make more of an overall wash into some areas I really don't care if there's a border at all. And be sure to use a paper that's heavy enough to take on a wash. Otherwise, the paper will crinkle and start making waves. And this one's a good one. I would have to, and it's not just your multimedia. It's a little bit heavier than the multimedia. And I also kind of get impatient a little bit, and you'll see that in a minute. And I used a mop. And the mop, here's what I did not want to put water on the entire subject that I'm painting. I wanted some white to show up within the building. See, there's the mop. And I'm not going to go not all the way down. I want to touch a little bit where the entrance is, but not all, because I kind of want to imply the entrance, but I do want that to be kind of grounded in this painting, and you'll see how I do that in a bit. And then once I get the colors in, I'm using a permanent pen, and this is a .01. It's really, really fine. And you can see there on the left spire, I began to do some markings with this, and I found I just didn't want to commit too much with the black pen. I wanted the watercolor to do most of the storytelling and then allow for this to come back later and just give a little bit of a hint of some of the triangles I just talked about that's on this St. Patrick's Cathedral, but not all of them. And that just gives it a little flavor. And then I used also this other permanent ink pen. It's got a fat tip. I didn't use it on this one because it's kind of a small painting. I used the fine side, and this, like I said, is a permanent black ink pen. And I used it very much like I used this other one, this 0.01, except this one here, I can make a little bit of a bigger marking to give a little bit more of the shades and shadows that I wanted to do. With the paint, I started off with a yellow ochre is what the color I have first, and then I added a burnt umber to give some of the darker browns. Now this right here is I'm using a kind of a mixture of the ultramarine and the ochre. I'm trying to keep it somewhat of a limited palette so they all can kind of work together. And I just love how this blue kind of pops a little bit into that. I told you ultramarine. Actually, you know what I did use is I used this Viridian. It's kind of a greenish blue. And I really love how that just saturates with the other colors and brings in some interest. I'm only going to use it on just sparingly, just in some areas to kind of tie it together on the left, but having the spire in the foreground, letting that be kind of more of a pop or more of a focal point. So that kind of added a little drama to it. This wash, you've got to try it. Give it a try with these pens. Don't be too exact. You know, look what the subject matter I'm doing right here. I'm working on St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York with all kinds of intricate Gothic arches and triangles, lots of triangles, and a little columns here and there. There's no way that you really would want to spend too much time drawing every detail because you'd get lost in the detail and you would lose the emotional effect that this fantastic building can give to you in just a wash watercolor. Now here's a trick, something about us architects. When we look at buildings, we're not just looking at the front door or the windows here. We're looking at the overall composition, and oftentimes, and I'll speak for myself, but I bet there's a lot of other people do this too, particularly the people who like to follow architectural design. Walking along New York City can be hazardous as an architect because we're always looking up. We're looking at the top of these buildings. There are so many amazing things at tops of buildings. And that's what I'm trying to capture here in this painting. Just a little bit of the emotional effect that I sense, the uplifting, the grandiose, and some hinting that there is a little bit of detail up there to see. And with the streaks of the wash and the watercolor on there, man, I tell you can't go wrong. Let the watercolor do the work for you. You know, it's a surprise for me every time I do that. You really don't know exactly how it's going to turn out, how these colors are going to blend together and bleed together and expand on together or not. But make sure you keep that paper wet when you're doing the watercolor wash. Otherwise, you could have some cauliflowering. So it's easy to get tempted saying, you know what, I want to color a little bit more here. And as soon as you put that water on and then the watercolor, it's going to start drying. And you want to make sure that you're adding the watercolor in a wash fashion when the paper is still wet. Don't go back and try to touch things up when it's kind of drying. You can go back later after it's totally dry. That's fine, but then you're kind of going to lose a little bit of the surprise that the watercolor wash will give to you. With this pen, I'm just adding a little bit of detail here and there, as I pointed out, just to kind of give some interest. Have you done a wash, a watercolor wash? If you have, send a picture of it to me at urbansketchpad.com. I'd love to see it. Take a look at all the detail up there on the top of this terrific landmark building. Look at all the triangles. There's some rectangles, but a lot of triangles. And those Gothic arches, the louvers, that was a really good element to be able to draw onto this. Just little lines. Hey, be sure to subscribe to this channel. I would love to be able to share more ideas with you. You know, if you were to paint the brick or the stonework, what would you do? You would probably have maybe a tombow that would allow for different hues of the same grayish, brownish color. But we didn't do that here. Look at that rose window. All that detail. Just to give it, just to imply what is going on is all that really we need to do in this watercolor. So I'm using a rigger right now. Hey, if you like this kind of video, give me a thumbs up. And using the rigger allows me to just have a little bit of shade and shadows added to some of the areas. And it's not a gray paint necessarily. It's actually a mixture of the same paints that are on the painting already, just in a darker hue. And it really kind of then blends in within the same root colors that's already in this painting. And you know, just a little touch. We could do the same thing with the tombow. The tombow, we have kind of a grayish colors. There's warm grays and blue grays you can use. Some are darker than the others. And those two are really good tools to use to give more depth. But I did use some of the tombow a little bit, but not very much. I only used it mainly to outline it at the very beginning. Here I'm using a black permanent ink just to kind of give some really black spots for a little bit of contrast, something to give it a little bit of pop in some of the details that are in there that we kind of saw in that blow up picture. Here's a closer look at this watercoloring, and you'll see the details are really just kind of implied, and that's perfect. We just have a watercolor wash just to give the emotion and the drama of this fantastic landmark building. The overall composition, I think, is great the way the watercolors all kind of work together. It's not just me, it's the watercolors doing it themselves, and you can do that too. I'll see you on the next video.